Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Regina Loukotova and this is our ARCHIP podcast, which is architecture podcast. And today we have our first student here, Isabel. Welcome. And we are going to start interviewing our students. And Isabella has been with us for 5 years. Now she's finishing her master diploma. So I thought to start our interview with your project. So can you share with us your experience with working on your master project? What is your topic? And yeah, even though I know it indeed, but can you just share this with us?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And so I'm deep in my master's now. I'm enjoying it much more than my bachelor's. I think most students can also say this because we're just less lost and we have a deeper passion now because now we know the basics, so we have the tools that have equipped us to be able to do more than we were before when we were kind of looking for how to bring things to fruition.
That's interesting comparison because you also are aware of that 20 years ago there were no bachelor project, there were no bachelor degree actually, so students were studying 5 years and they actually did only one school leaving project. That was a master project. So true, this I was not aware of, but thank you for sharing that.
So my project is about interconnecting the inner yards of courtyards. I'm focusing mostly on residential and mixed-use blocks of this typical block typology, and I'm focusing on the different ways that people experience the city and our experience as we walk through the courtyards, as we walk on the streets, and the new opportunities that could be there for people if the inner yards were interconnected. So I'm looking at people's relationship to the environment around them, and I'm looking and touching a bit on this public-private relationship between people and buildings and property, and overall focusing on public space.
Indeed, but probably people would be interested, not your people in your projects, but I mean our listeners would be interested in where is your project situated, and whether you analyze the existing one, let's say historical samples, and then bringing it into new proposals, or how you deal with that topic.
So my project is taking place over 7 blocks in Prague 7 on the lower Holešovice side, and the blocks are much larger than the typical block structure, and I started out my thesis by kind of how I started out, just being here in Prague, which was walking around the city. It's a very walkable city to me, and I loved exploring the different courtyards and kind of seeing where I could walk and discovering new public spaces. And so out of that, it kind of sparked my thesis as a whole. So in walking around the old town, which is this medieval settlement, I was noticing the meandering of the paths, how when you go through certain passageways that you're connected to different courtyards. And then I lived in Prague 7, and so while I was there I noticed that the way that you experience, or the way that I experienced walking on the streets, was very different. There was less meandering paths, everything was very straight, it was more grid-like, and it kind of led me into this topic of, well, let's say the medieval settlements is kind of this base, maybe DNA of Prague, where it's like the initial startings of the city, and it's what everybody really knows Prague for, right?
True, even though it's just, 5% of the entire Prague area.
And now, of course, it's different because now we have how the blocks are today. There's different block typologies that are being built, so users experience the city and the way that you walk through it differently, whether there's no passageways, or you're walking through lots of open space, and so forth. So I wanted to take this, let's say, medieval or like original DNA of Prague, and to see if it was possible to implement it or project it onto the standard or typical block typology today. The safe and easy kind of building method for at least what I understand and what I see is that it's very comfortable for Czechs to build the normal block typology where there's an inner courtyard, there's divided plots, and then there's all the buildings around it. And to some extent it can be a little permeable for people to go through, but it's not as permeable as the old town in the medieval settlement.
Indeed, we are conservative, that's true. I mean, I would say that the block solutions, it's also a bit conservative, even though it's used quite frequent. It's kind of a safe project to have that. But I am not following your project like for past few weeks, so I would be interested whether you are designing a new structure. You try to design an ideal public space within a city courtyard based in the medieval structure, or how does your project develop?
So my project is taking this kind of like meandering like pathways and implementing it on this 6 to 7 different blocks in Holešovice. So what I'm doing with my project is I'm taking the inner yards and kind of clearing out a little bit of it, kind of saying if there was less of this public-private tension where it's very difficult to enter the inner yards, or buildings courtyards are very small, there's only trash cans in there, nobody goes there for any kind of engaging with your neighbors, and you don't really meet people there. You might meet people on the streets, but then you need to have a public space to meet them, because you don't often just meet them on the sidewalk and say, oh, hi, I'm new here to Prague, or however it is. So I'm out of these 7 different blocks, I've kind of cleared and seen that there's different ways that the inner yard can be filled with this kind of, either it's empty and it has like, let's say a park or some kind of public space in it, or there's a second way where there's a little bit of something kind of like an island typology, so there's different buildings or businesses that are within the inner yard and it's semi-accessible. Some of the inner yards are not accessible at all, but there's opportunity at least for the surrounding buildings next to it to have some kind of added function, even if it's only for the residents. So at a larger scale, I've connected and made the blocks more permeable, moving from south to north or north to south, so that from, let's say, the blocks that I'm working on are from around Holešovická tržnice up to the Docks Art Gallery. So users would be able to walk across the New Holka Bridge. They would then be able to kind of go through Pražská tržnice or Holešovická tržnice, enjoy some of the different, the fresh market there or some of the stores, and then to kind of even trail their way up and continue to go north. So they can go through the Tusarova block, then they can go, and there's multiple entrances. It allows users to have a more permeable but also continuous experience in walking through the different inner yards. And so this is
thank you, interesting. I just would add that the urban plan for Lower Holešovice was made probably at the end of the 19th century. I don't know the exact date, but you are implementing your ideas into those blocks from the end of the 19th century. Okay, now when you were speaking about your current project, I was also thinking about your bachelor diploma project when you worked like outside of Prague in a smaller city, and you were interested in those small, let's say, urban interventions. I don't know whether this was your best project or the project you liked most, or whether you can share with us now some of your projects from your studies which you really enjoyed.
I did really enjoy my bachelor thesis project, and I think it was also out of the inspiration. I think around that time IPR had just also come out with their user design manual, or maybe it was a year before. They had recently redone it, I think, and it was inspiring, it was exciting to see, and so my bachelor thesis project was about as you said, it was about like these urban interventions, and I think I enjoyed that one the most. And it was because in these urban interventions, it wasn't just about finding ways to unify this very small town outside of Karlovy Vary. It wasn't just about finding ways to unify it, but it was also finding moments where they were very like small, humble moments that the locals that are there that they would normally experience, but making it a more pleasant interaction and a pleasant space for them to do it. So it would help to give them a little bit more of like a unifying identity, but also it wouldn't be in a very large, flashy way. It would be in a very simple way of consistent paving, of like space for maybe moms who are going on the walk like through the main road, that there's a gazebo for them to actually sit at and to chat or to gossip about whatever's happening in the town and things like this. So I think this one was probably my favorite project.
Because I think the word no, I forgot it, acupuncture. That kind of exactly describes what such a intervention does. That actually acupuncture is also, it's a thin needle which you put inside your body. So I think that's exactly what you are talking about, that you can make really very slight change in the city environment, very like a little moment which really makes a lot with the public life, which improves the life of people around there. Great. I think that's enough about your projects at ARCHIP. And if we go back to your teenage age, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you actually come from, and why did you decide to study architecture?
Yeah. So I'm American by passports. I grew up in India and Sri Lanka, and so I'm very familiar and comfortable with Eastern culture. And so in growing up in India, it was very different, of course, to Europe, and so this was where I grew up. I experienced a lot of nice cultural mixes, and between living in India and in the United States and in Sri Lanka, and now in Prague, there's been a whole fusion of different cultures, and I think it's very much influenced the way that I think and approach different parts of my projects. So I grew up there in India, and part of it actually inspired me for moving into architecture. The school that I went to in India, they were very much involved with community engagement, so there were always opportunities for students to somehow go and be involved with the community, whether it was helping women find ways to make a business, or I don't know. There were a lot of different things that
you are speaking about your colleague, or about like.
It was about my high school education.
High school
yes.
education.
So for my high school education at Woodstock School, we had different community engagements. So we would either go and maybe it was volunteer at the hospital. We would take outdoor activity weeks, and we would get to know and kind of be engaged with the local community, be challenged to find ways that we could use our education that we were receiving at the school to help improve the lives of others around us. So part of this inspired me that when I started with architecture, and to be able to find ways or tools to improve the lives of others.
Also like physically, not only by, let's say, social interaction.
But more physically, that it's, I think over the past years, it's also like been growing. It kind of was something that I only really came to realize after I started studying architecture, which is that I wanted to be able to help with some kind of sustainable rural development involving some kind of vernacular architecture and working with maybe other interdisciplinary or other topics like economics and business, to be able to improve the lives and the planning of cities in rural settings in India, which is like where I grew up. So this is more about why I wanted to do architecture, to be able to help people to physically improve the environment, to do it in a sustainable way, to involve local cultural methods and architectural styles, to be able to give either local tradesmen and craftsmen a chance to be able to
understand. It's more like
their...
this, let's say, very sensitive social bottom-up approach. I would somehow round that it's very different to how architecture had been taught in our part of the world. It was like, the architects in white suits and designing the building as a theater or a huge residential, just not bottom up, but the other way around process. So I'm happy that you found also your projects here in totally different city from your previous stays, and that you, as far as I know, you love Prague and you like to work here on the projects. I think that's all I would like to ask you. Is there any question you would like to ask me? We actually haven't thought about this before, but it's also a possibility. If not, then I will thank you for your time, and see you maybe next time when we shoot the continuation of our interview. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and